are now looking at 6 of our favorite episodes. We're going to watch number 6. What's that?
We're starting with 6.
Yeah, but I haven't ranked them in order. Like, this one is not as good as number 1. These are all really interesting guests for different reasons.
I just wanted a countdown, so I put them in an order, but they're all 6. All of our guests are great, but the 6 that we chose, they're all something special.
Yeah, and this one's really special because it was sort of a lowdown, a breakdown of by Dr. Josh Kreimeyer of what was going on in the Ukraine before the most recent Russian invasion. And things were bad then. Can't imagine now.
Yeah, it almost prophetic, some of the things he talked about. And hopefully the work he did helped them in this current situation. If you want to watch this episode without us talking at all, it's episode 13. It's still on YouTube. It's not on Rumble because we only started Rumble this past year, but it is on YouTube, and our information is at the end of every episode.
Yes, and so I'm really excited to hear from our friend Dr. Josh Kreimeyer.
So, Josh, I'll give you an easy one to start with.
Okay.
Where'd you go to college?
So I went to Mankato State University in Minnesota. Yeah. The big town on Little House on the Prairie. When Pa loaded up the wagon,
so
they went to Mankato.
Well, this was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, look at Doug sitting there, though. We miss him.
She wrote a lot of books.
She did. That she did. So, yeah. It switched. I was the last graduating class for Mankato State. It went to Minnesota State at Mankato after I graduated.
Oh, like every other college is kind of doing that now.
Exactly. Yeah, they took the trend.
So I heard you got a BS in recreation. So is your favorite show Parks and Rec?
Actually, yeah. I've watched that show and I related a lot.
Was that Doug's question?
I don't know.
Yeah, that was a good question, though.
You kind of look like Chris. Was it Chris Pratt?
Chris Pratt, yeah. Yeah. I've been told that.
Yeah. You could have been the star of Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, in another life.
Sliding down into the slime. Huh?
That's right. Yeah, so that's what I started in. I was ready to take the world by storm. I was the weed inspector for the city of Mankato right out of college.
Oh, wow. Must be fun.
I checked people's noxious weeds, and we did aerial photography actually for property ownership. It was kind of interesting. And I had to report to City Hall, the bad people that let their weeds grow. So back in the day, we were fairly antiquated in how we did that, but several incidents.
What do you find most interesting about Josh?
I've known him for quite a long time, even before he got his PhD. But what really put it over the top for me was when he talked about his work in the Ukraine and just how poorly people were not even respected as human beings there.
Yeah, I have often wondered what this has been like with this journey, him knowing Ukrainians personally, and the pain that they've gone through, and even seeing some of his work with the government kind of spiral.
Yeah, and I wonder if he was actually, told you had to leave the country, you had to stop with the war going on, or I wonder if they've let them go in to help. I don't know. It seems like that'd be pretty dangerous.
Yeah. But as we'll find out, he was had been around danger before.
Yeah.
City Park Department mowing grass, literally.
Oh, wow.
Like I got a degree in mowing grass. It's more than that, turf management science and stuff like that.
I worked for the city when I was in college, and so I mowed grass before I got my degree.
Yeah, that's right. Support that process. That was my process, the whole thing. Yeah, so then I joined the military as a Russian linguist right out of college.
All right, look at that. He's looks like he's 8.
He does. He looks like he's barely 14 or 15.
Yeah, he was in Iraq same time I was too.
And I realized that everywhere I had ever been, even Walmart, I worked at Walmart for a while, and people would hide in the back. I don't know if you knew this phenomenon, but when you can't find somebody, there's like 30 people working there, but they hide in the back and put bikes together. And there's only so many bikes to put together, but they'd just be sitting back there gabbing. I was actually the one out there trying to help people. I realized that I was drawn to that and didn't want to hide.
We need him back at Walmart badly.
That's right. You know, I can never find anyone at Walmart either.
Yeah, not even a checkout. One checkout, everything else is self-checkout. I don't get paid to check my own stuff out.
That's an interesting thought, Doug. I wonder if we sent them the bill for checking out.
Yeah,
Bill them for 1 hour of time.
yeah. I need a 25% discount because I bagged my own junk.
Yeah, that's right. I am charging you 3 pineapples.
That's right. That's right. That's right. I need a little help. But yeah, I just really went through a dark time and came out of it and said, yeah, this is it. I felt right about it. So I got my master's in counseling, which was great. And then several years of working there, I got a part-time gig teaching as affiliate faculty. A lot of universities have like part-time faculty just to teach a class here or there. So I did that. And what I realized was I'd work, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30, doing trauma counseling, heavy work. And then I have a class on a Saturday. And I had a recollection one time of it not feeling like work. I got up early on Saturday and it was like, I get to go teach, And then I was like, huh. And people started talking to me about that pathway, and you needed a PhD to do that full time. So I thought, why not? Glutton for punishment.
Yeah. More education. And now my wife's glad because I get paid to be there. Instead of, just being in school because you're
and me
teaching.
paying. It's like now I bring home some money when I go to school. So
There you go.
she's happy about that part.
So you had to do a thesis
I did.
For your PhD?
I
So
did.
what
I had
was your
a
thesis on?
dissertation on...
Do you have to do a thesis for medical school?
Only if you're a combined MD PhD program.
No, you still did a fair amount of writing.
Most of that focused on documentation and clinical charts, consultations, things like that.
That was back in the Stone Age before they had the computers.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, everything was by hand, probably to about the year 2008. Some hospitals made the adjustment earlier, but many it wasn't until that time.
The first ever there, that we were training them to the same level as other counselors around the world with statistical significance.
Wow.
So
Wow.
it was pretty
That's
cool,
it.
yeah. We
Were
are
these
effectively
guys
training them.
So you're training them so they understood it as well as in the U.S. or?
Yeah, we
So-
got, last year, 2020, we got the accreditation process that shows basically equivalency, that our program meets the standards of international counselor educator programs. It's called EARCEP.
So, I mean, you can start pretty old and still put all this stuff together. And,
That's right.
And I mean, come up with a really good program.
Yeah,
And,
yeah. It's pretty amazing what's happened there.
Well, so how was this program that you were involved creating different than sort of the gold standards you were comparing it against? I assume you were comparing against some sort of gold standard in terms of approach.
Yeah. Most of the world for mental health has some form of like a master's degree. And in most places, people will have like an undergraduate in psychology, social work, human services, communication, something like that. But obviously, I'm a perfect example of somebody that, Parks and Rec. It was kind of a random degree. But we did some stuff. There was a track of classes that I took called therapeutic recreation, actually, and those were the classes I actually liked more. I just didn't know it at the time. But it is a field that you can have accounting, business, just about any background. You have to
I
have
don't know
a
about
bachelor's
those
degree.
accounting majors.
Yeah, government auditor, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
See, Doug's got to promote those accounting majors there. That's his world.
And he's good at it.
As Peter often says.
Yeah. So in Ukraine it was the same thing where People have mostly a bachelor in psychology, bachelor's degree, and they will say, I'm a psychologist with that bachelor's degree.
This was so early on, I don't think we had the timer. We weren't on this camera here. We hadn't really, because we filmed him in the winter long before his episode was on. So we really hadn't developed much of our procedure yet either.
Yeah, we certainly refined it over time.
C was a master's degree in counseling. So
if I understand what you're saying, would it be like you were looking at can masters or PhD trained people from the West, how were their results reducing depression or anxiety or suicide compared to the more layman trained by your organization?
Yes.
And you found that they both did the job the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I'm assuming that not just the same, but that both were positive results, actually helping people. We wouldn't want a situation where we have the PhDs and the Ukrainian novices making everyone worse.
Exactly.
Without waiting in line in Ukraine to jump off the roof, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
We worked the bread lines. We would go and
Yeah, Josh,
always-
good liners.
Great.
come into our line.
Well,
No.
counseling for food. Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah, a little
That's right.
stand on the side of the road. That's great. Well, on that note, we will take a quick break and we'll be right back. Okay. So, Josh, let's talk a little bit about some of your charity work. Tell us about your humanitarian work in the Ukraine.
Sure.
Think about his sense of humor when we did that drama at church and we had that state senator and he was doing the head wise man, and he was doing 4 more years.
Yeah.
There's a square in Kiev, the capital, which actually it's not Kiev, it's Kiev, which I should highlight for
The
people.
Ukrainian pronunciation.
The Ukrainian pronunciation, and also it's Ukraine, not the Ukraine, part of the former Soviet Union. So the people of Ukraine would be very happy if I definitely emphasize that for anybody that sees this, to say Ukraine, and it's Kiev.
Yeah.
So not
We don't want
Kiev.
you to get in trouble the next time you're over there.
Yeah. I got to be able to show my face there again at some point. So
Yeah, they'll cut you off the pierogies or whatever.
that's right.
They do.
I'd like to get a couple of those pierogies going.
Yeah. I always associate Russian pierogies, but I know Ukraine has really good ones too.
Here in Kiev, called Maidan Nezalezhnosti, and it's the Freedom Square. And the post-Soviet Ukraine culture, there was 2 factions. There was a faction that longed for the days of Soviet control, where some people viewed that as helpful, I think. This is my interpretation, by the way. And then other people who were like, we have freedom now, and we want to be more like the West and have some of the things that Western societies enjoy, the freedoms and free market economy, and things of that nature. So within that mix, in the early 2000s, the president at the time or the mid 2000s, was getting ready to sign a document that aligned Ukraine with the West more. And I don't know the nature of the document or anything, but it was a big thing. Apparently he dragged his feet and didn't do it, and so people were protesting. And I think, don't quote me on this, I'm pretty sure it was 2014 is when it kicked off. There was peaceful protests in this square, and it's actually like 4 squares. It's hard to imagine, but if you can imagine like a big square where people would meet, there's 4 of them, so it's this massive space. And I think they had 100,000, if not a couple 100,000 people there. I mean, it was a lot of people. And what happened is the government and Russian-leaning forces within the government, because I mean, it butts up to Russia, so there's still quite a bit of influence there, kind of a puppet state in some senses. They opened fire on these peaceful protesters and had some real bullets mixed in with the rubber ones. And I believe, my numbers might be off here, but I think there was a couple hundred people that they murdered. And this was 2014 in what many people would consider an Eastern European country. And I don't think a lot of people thought that kind of thing could happen. I don't think they believed that, but it happened. The government fired on these people, and there was several days of riots, and not riots, the protesters remained peaceful, but the government was shooting on them, and they had underground hospitals that were formed to help people, and the government banned those, and it was just this massive, massive thing. There's a documentary called Winter on Fire, if anybody was interested in seeing it. Documents from the ground what happened at that time. So within that setup, and then Russia came in and annexed Crimea, which is a peninsula area that's...
Is it on a port?
It's on a port, yeah. Beautiful, beautiful area from what I've seen.
Important from the
Very,
strategic point.
very important.
Very close to a lot of stuff we're seeing nowadays.
Yeah, very strategic port.
Yeah. And little did we know when we record this episode, we were going to see just a resurgence of all this politically.
That it's kind of a proxy war. It's very interesting, the word war or conflict, you know, what, depending on where you are and who you're talking to, what word they use. But all I know is that there's like 20,000 people have died, and they're still shooting at people every single day on what they call the front. And Ukrainian citizens are dying, and there's a couple million internally displaced people that have moved from that area within the country. And the rest of the world is kind of just like sitting there.
You know, I recall, wasn't there some sort of treaty that Bill Clinton signed that said that the United States would defend Ukraine if they were ever attacked?
That's right. That was a pre-NATO kind of thing, and they've been waiting for that, wanting to be in NATO and to get that, you know, because then they would have some of that protection. And a lot of people there feel like we've left them out to dry and we're just not doing anything, but it's so complicated.
That's
We'd have
such
to
a
face
polite
the bear.
way of putting it.
It is, I know.
Is the treaty, is that something that prevents them being part of NATO?
I'm not sure.
I know there's some reasoning behind no NATO alliance, but
Yeah, the treaty was actually with, like, I think 5 major countries, including the United States and France, that they would protect Ukraine if they gave up nuclear weapons.
yeah, and not wanting to put a NATO country right on Russia's border, I think was another one of the things that they were concerned about.
And internally displaced people in the country. I was interviewing for my doctorate program, actually, and it was a Ukrainian national that's been teaching in the U.S. for a few years, several years actually, Dr. Olya Zaporozhets, and she interviewed me. She interviewed me for my program.
I think we filmed this a month before the beginning of the Ukraine war.
Yeah,
I guess
that's what
we-
we planned it.
Yeah, we didn't plan it. He was just a guest at the time. If you were a warm body and had a pulse, he was a great guest. But when we were a warm body, have a pulse, she could be on the show. But yeah, I think it was a month later that this thing kicked off.
First aid that she went over and just started doing some trainings for lay people in the church and just volunteered and brought a few students over and did that. It became very clear very quickly that they needed more. By the time I came in 2015, she'd been, I think there was 2 or 3 trips they had taken. And the way she was posing it to me was a post-bachelor's certificate. So training people that had some training and just giving them basic counseling skills. But within the first few months of me going there, we were like, this needs to be a master's degree. And we started talking about what that entails, because it's not a field that exists. They do not have a master's degree in trauma-informed counseling in the country. It's the mental health is psychiatrists and bachelor's level psychology people.
Yeah, and so you've got war, death,
Yep.
probably starvation, PTSD out the wazoo.
Lots of PTSD.
Probably people being victim of rape and all these things.
All of that.
Horrible human suffering
Yep.
and overwhelming what resources are available.
Yes. Yeah. And I think we try to have a balanced perspective and stay humble. That I've always said we don't want to be culturally imperialistic and go in and, say this is how you do it. But there are universal aspects of being human that when you experience trauma, physiologically, your body's going to do the same thing. And we know how to treat that. And there's things we can share that will help. But we were always very sensitive to things we brought, teaching that, and then saying, how does that make sense within your culture? So as we built it, it was a very culturally sensitive model that we built, but still to the standard of like confidentiality had to be there, certain ethics. And so one of the first things we did was, this is one of the most impactful things I've experienced being over there. My first trip, I was teaching basic counseling skills to several students. And after that, we finished that class, the same room, everybody came in from these 3 other classes. And one of our faculty said, we're going to be leaving. We have to go back to the US, but as we have taught you these things, one of the next steps is going to be to build an ethical code for you to practice under in your country. We need some brave people to stand up and do this work after we've left, after we kind of taught them some of the basic ethical structures, like these big fancy words, beneficent.
He's talking about things that we take for granted, but so many cultures don't have anything like that.
Society, when they say "Captain, my captain," and they stand up on the desks, and if you don't cry, you're not human, right? At that point, that's what they did. They stood up and said, "I will fight for my country. I will be on the ethics board." And, and like 6 people stood up in this group of like 30 people, and it was just so impactful. I teared up, at that moment. It was powerful. So yeah, the charity. That word, we didn't use that word necessarily, but that's how it started out, like meeting a need within a small group, and then it just built. And I joined at the level where it was like pretty clearly by the first trip when I left, actually, we were already talking about it being a master's degree.
So I'm going to give you a question to think about right before we go to our next break. There's books, Toxic Charity and When Helping Hurts.
Yes.
And as you guys thought about this, did you think about, okay, we're going in and maybe we're going to have to use a disaster relief model for a little while and then shift more to a development model afterwards? We'll want your thoughts on that when we come right back.
Perfect.
So we're back with Dr. Josh Kreimeyer. He's been telling us about his humanitarian work in the Ukraine. And the question I left off with was the idea of, in a society when there's bad things going on, there's a time for sort of relief work, but then there's also time for building up and making the local self-sufficiency. Did your program go through a phase like that, or was that on your radar?
Yeah, from the very beginning, we were very clear about the model that we were looking at. We wanted to first teach the first generation of counselors, and then from within that group, we had already started eyeballing from the very beginning the ones that were very strong as potential for teachers and supervisors. A big part of ethical and quality mental health care when you're kind of building the field. I've talked about the work there as building the field of counseling in Ukraine. In fact, I'm hoping to write a book about that, actually, with that title in there somewhere.
I wonder if did he finish that book?
I haven't talked to him in a while. I'm not sure.
Yeah, they're kind of traveling around in an RV now.
Are they really?
Yeah, they live all the way up in Denver now, I think.
So they sold their house?
They moved out of Castle Rock too.
Wow.
And I think they're up in Denver. and they have an RV, so I think they're traveling more in the RV than at least in the warmer months.
That has a certain amount of appeal to it.
Yeah, I've always
In the
liked
warmer
idea.
months. Yeah, not in the Colorado winter.
Yeah, well, yeah, the winter, you drive south to Texas or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It'd be interesting how that's impacted his Ukrainian work.
Of moving forward and taking over the teaching responsibilities. So now
Working yourself out of a job.
working
in a
ourselves out of
sense.
our job, from the very beginning. So we were well aware of that, and we're still there as consultants, but they do most of the teaching.
Good.
When I go there now, I just do like a special little seminar on a special topic that they might not have as much information on, or I do a lot of family type of trainings and stuff for them, but they're running the program. It's theirs. We built 3 years ago, we built the first counseling center of its kind. That is kind of our internship facility and a working clinic for the community. There wasn't really anything like that.
Is there a lot of English that's spoken, or is there a different sort of second language?
I had lived
Besides
in
Russian, I'm sure there's some Russian around still too.
Oh yeah, Russian is actually spoken on the street a lot in the big cities, like Kyiv and Lviv are two of the bigger cities, and I've heard in Odessa too. I've not been there, but I've heard they speak a lot of Russian on the streets. So the Russian that I know, I get around with it. I can get in a taxi. I go to the restaurant. When I first started, it's just since I've been going there in 2015. The first time I was there, I noticed that it was Russian everywhere, and I asked about Ukrainian language, and they said, "Oh, it's for government functioning, the opera, the military uses it, so very official stuff." And that's kind of the delineation that it was when I first got there. But there's been a wave now, to say, of nationalism is kind of what I would call it, and people are speaking more Ukrainian on the street. When I walk around, I hear more Ukrainian being spoken.
So
That's probably a really big thing there right now, that
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah.
you know to yourself culturally, if you're speaking Russian, maybe you're not trusted.
Or shot at.
Yeah.
That part of Europe, people speak English almost everywhere you go. You can find somebody that you can communicate enough with to figure things out. In Ukraine, you find some people, but I think it's less. My feel is that it's less people out in the community. It's a little harder to find somebody. But yeah, for the teaching part, we want to make sure they really understand it. So we would teach, when we were teaching, I would teach in English. I got really slow. My wife would know when I came back from a trip, because I would say, "Hello, dear. It's good to be back." I would talk like I still needed my brain was so used to needing a translator that.
and Amy would be going, and what have you been smoking?
Exactly.
Yeah,
It felt kind of weird to her,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Amy gave him all kinds of grief and had fun with it when he came back.
So you got the translators. Is there pretty much available internet?
There is.
Can people generally buy some sort of functioning laptop? Is
Yeah.
that generally available?
It is, yeah, and people have cell phones out on the street. You know, some of they might be a couple models back. I don't know. I haven't really studied that extensively, that metric.
I'm a couple of models back.
Yeah, that's right. That's
I think Deb was like 8 models back.
Well, everyone doesn't need the latest and greatest cell phone.
Yep. Yeah, I'd go to a flip phone if I didn't need the functions that I do have.
Yeah.
type of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, and then I was thinking too of other like technology pieces. We don't really use anything with translation except live translation. Like where I'm
Sure,
up front,
sure.
the translator's right next to me, and
Yeah.
it's just we break it down a little
So you're
bit
not
more.
like using Google Translator.
No. I do use Google Translate when I'm over there. There's the one with the camera
yeah.
where like reading a menu. It'll live. You're moving it,
wow.
and it shows you English on your phone
Oh wow.
from the Ukrainian, which is pretty cool.
Wow, that is neat.
So I use that, but with the teaching,
Think of the jokes they could do on Americans. Yeah, that really is chicken.
Yeah. Big Mac.
Yeah.
I could speak more that way,
Wow. Cool.
but we don't always use that. So
And the name of the group, International Mental Health Consultants, is that?
Yeah, that is
one is that the whole umbrella group, or is that a part of it? Or
So we started through Regent University, which is in Virginia Beach, which is where I did my doctorate, and it was a project. That's kind of how we called it. And we would just use students either in the doctoral program or the master's in counseling and kind of run it like a missions trip where we weren't doing church work or building a church or anything, but people would raise funds to get themselves over there. And then we would get the labor, if you will, of students that needed to do things for experience and credit for some of their classes. And we still do that. Regent is a hub, but we needed to do more at a certain point and it's a nonprofit called International Mental Health Consultants. And we specifically called it that because there's some other parts of the world around Ukraine that have also asked us to now come in and kind of replicate what we've done in Ukraine and other places, building the field of counseling in these places. So we didn't want it to be tied to Ukraine, but that is all we're doing right now. And it allows us to...
just all of the Ukraine.
Just all of Ukraine, yeah. But it allows us to move money. It allows us to get grants. It allows us to, like when students come, we have to buy the tickets and all that kind of stuff. We run it through International Mental IMHC.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing unusual. That's modus operandi normal. Yeah,
it's all above the board. I promise.
Yeah. Good. So shameless plug. Can people donate to that?
They can. Yeah, it's. I don't have the exact website, but if you Google international,
we'll put it on the end of the episode. Yeah.
Right here,
and,
please.
Yeah, and I assume that the website we can also tell if people want to get involved how they can apply to get involved.
Absolutely.
All right.
I get that.
You shared with me last time a couple of horrible observations. You've already said a few. Tell me about how you noticed, and the gory details, how people that have Down syndrome are not actually even officially considered a human being.
This one surprised me a lot.
Me too.
You know, because I've known people with Downs, I've never had a negative view of them, but to treat someone as subhuman just because they have some kind of deficiency.
Yeah.
It's just...
I mean, they wouldn't even get the equivalent of a Social Security card in there.
It's kind of stored in a warehouse till they died with only hoping that someone will care for them.
Yeah.
Social work kind of organization would be, I'm not sure how to say it, Department of Health and Human Services or something, equivalent, something like that, but that ran orphanages. And they knew that we have our masters in counseling, and then what we have is a track, a specialty in working with children. And so the person from the national level government entities asked if we could come into the orphanages and do some work. And we said, yes, we've got we had about a platoon-sized element at that time of people that were trained that could do this work, and it would be good training for them. So that's what I'm loving right now, is taking a need in the community, matching it up with the people we have. Like, I love doing that. And but what happened is we picked 2 orphanages to start doing the work, and I did the first training there with them in play therapy. And while I was there, that's all the backstory. While I was there, I learned that like the equivalent of a Social Security number was not given to kids with Down syndrome and other disabilities too. But specifically Down syndrome is the one they talked about a lot. And
so these kids were not eligible for certain services then? They just were sort of expected just to fall by the wayside and die? Was that sort of the expectation?
The words they used, they were almost ashamed when people were talking to me about this. It was out of sight, out of mind. Like they didn't want to deal with those kids.
How horrible.
And, so there was a lot of Down syndrome kids. And parents would sometimes... In some countries, people give their kids to an orphanage because it's the best option. They get 3 hots and a cot, and they have opportunities, and the parent just can't support the kid. But they go visit them every week.
Sure.
You know, in Ukraine, it seemed to me like that wasn't always the case. Like it was sometimes like, I don't know the whole story, but it seemed like they weren't visited.
Wow.
Is what it looked like. So they weren't, to me, not even human. Like they weren't respected as a.
That's certainly not a place you want any society to get to.
No.
That's not good.
No.
It seems like things can go much.
The dog in the house is getting better treatment than the kid with Downs.
Yeah, that's sad.
The other big piece I just wanted to share quickly is that the like younger kids, there's so many of them that they don't hold them, and it's connected to a well, for them they think a friend of mine. Sorry, I'm all over the place here, but a friend of mine went to volunteer at one of these orphanages, and she just started grabbing one of the babies that was crying to comfort the baby, and they were like, no, they'll get used to that. We can't do that. They let them cry it out. Yeah. And that just broke my heart, right? It's separate from the
give a little love and rock
yeah.
and hold a baby. I mean, who doesn't want to do that?
Yeah. So they let them cry it out, and then what happens? The psychological impact of that is what we call reactive attachment disorder, which are pretty much sociopathic children that don't have the ability to connect emotionally. And then
people
Isn't that some of what they're saying happened with COVID, with people wearing masks and not having connection? And this is before COVID, so or this is before COVID, we saw the impact of COVID.
That thought just for a moment, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you about another group that seemed to be discriminated against, and that's military veterans.
Yes.
Military veterans, when we come right back. Well, welcome back. And when we left off, I was asking Josh.
Thank you, Peter, for welcoming us back right there. I feel very welcome.
I feel welcome too.
Hatred of Ukraine military veterans. What was that all about?
Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic, another cultural piece that I've seen. And again, this is all my interpretation of my experiences, but based on a lot of, firsthand accounts of what I've seen. And again, another quick backstory. The piece I'm working on this year, academic year, in Ukraine at a distance with the pandemic and all, is I'm teaching a psychological support group of Ukrainian military veterans who are learning coding and other tech-related training to give them a different field of learning. And then there's companies in Ukraine and in the U.S. too that are agreeing to hire them after they've been trained. So we're offering the career support, doing mock interviews, talking about the stresses of working different shifts, and how to transition from the military to the civilian sector. So that's good. But one of the things that you see happening is that the workforce, I think, largely discriminates against military, thinking, yes, we support they always say heroes. That's a word, the translation they use a lot. Our heroes, so the lip service is there. But when it comes down to actually helping them, there's not always this, they're crazy. They have PTSD. They're a loose cannon. And so the stigma against veterans in the workplace is one area that I've seen. But this program that I'm a part of now is helping to change some of that.
Mm-hmm.
But we talk about that too. We talk about, well, how could you, live up to that stereotype? How can you combat that yourself? So it's something we've talked with the vets about. Another area is just the general premise of resources for mental health. The reason we are in the country is largely due to the military actions in the country, which parallels in the U.S. what happened after World War II. The history of mental health was the veterans came back from World War II, and we said, how do we help these people? We called it shell shock. We called it, soldier's heart, combat fatigue. We knew there was something there, and it actually, the influence of money and resources, much of what we know as the modern mental health in the U.S. and the West stems from that. I feel like it's the same thing there. They're just behind.
I mean, we think our VA is behind on the mental health, and in a lot of ways they still are, but this is just...
Oh, the VA here is light years ahead of what's
Yeah.
going around in most parts of the world.
And if you don't deal with these issues, which is what after World War II, we didn't deal with a lot of the issues and created new problems. Certainly after Vietnam.
Yeah, definitely a lot of suffering that wasn't addressed.
Sure, I can do that. No. Like, where are the resources? And I'm one person, They're looking for someone to come in. Some people were looking for someone to come in and just do it for them. But at the end of the day, what I've seen is there's no money. I'm not there to make money. I've volunteered thousands of hours over there. And I always tell them that too. I go, I've not taken a dime for being here. I volunteer my time. I take time away from my wife, my job, my family, my vacation time. That's how much I believe in what we're doing here. And they go, really? Like, they almost don't believe that. And I say, you're the government, and we're talking like department, like the Minister of Defense we met with in the country said, we have this money, we have NATO funds, we have other resources. We're not sending military support, but they are getting money. I've not seen any of that. We're like, we can do this, but we need you to pay for like a retreat for military families. You need to pay for room and board for the families and then cover ours too. Like just the meals, like just feed us for a 4-day weekend retreat. No money. Several years now. And so I feel like there's lip service to supporting the military, but it's not always, doesn't matriculate down to actually anything happening.
So, for instance, one of these, say, lower level counselors that you trained, can they go out and get a job? Is there money to even be hired as a counselor?
We are having to kind of work with the population mindset too, the stigma against reaching out for mental health care, because the thinking largely had been, oh, you're crazy. And you're going to get the jacket that makes...
But when all this started out, they wanted their people back behind the guns. And there was a lot of pressure for people to fight. And that's fine. You need to fight for your country, but you need to take care of those who fight afterwards, too.
They would use it to break people down as a weapon.
No, even in the West, there's...
In the West, too.
Special forces that do psych ops,
that's right.
The same kinds of things.
It is. Yeah. So I think even more there, where we're at a point in the U.S. now where it's almost in vogue to have a therapist. People will talk about it more now.
This episode, Doug has actually talked very little.
Yeah. The opening segment, he talked a lot.
Yeah.
Because back then, you guys divided the questions a little bit more. But yeah, he hasn't talked much. And this is early on. He gets more comfortable over the first year of doing all this.
We're setting a standard of what's reasonable for somebody to pay for an hour of therapy. And we're helping our new therapists work with that. So we're having to build kind of a business model around it too.
I mean, can they do the equivalent of our minimum wage? Is that...
That's kind of what they were looking at.
Yeah, I don't know what minimum wage is there. Like in Denver, it's whatever, $12.85 or something.
Yeah. I believe that's where we're at. I don't know all the details of that. That's above my pay grade or not something I've been working on. But I know they do have, a fee structure like at our clinic that we built.
I mean, that's even a problem with some medical insurances. Routinely, there are a lot of psychologist fees that are not covered.
Yeah.
You probably can get some psychiatry fees covered and some counseling, but it's hit or miss.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah. Well, we're going to move on with a question from Doug.
Sure.
The other Doug.
The other Doug. That's right. The other Doug's our director. I'm the main.
This was pre-microphone for me and camera for me.
He introduces us as brothers.
Oh, and I did want to
That's
mention one other thing. When you write your book, we want you back on the show as a guest. We'll
Yes.
talk about the book
Yes.
and
Love
do
it.
a shameless plug for the book.
All right.
Yeah, let's
All
show the
right.
book below it. Well, maybe in front of you.
Yeah,
I love
that's
it.
right, yeah.
I love it. I'd be glad to do that.
Okay, we're going to go to something lighter now. Your time in the military.
Yes.
So,
Oh.
what branch were you in?
Yeah. I served in the Army for 6 years.
And you were, Peter likes to say this word.
Oh, yeah.
Cryptologic linguist.
That's what it says on my DD-214.
Yeah.
Did you actually do that?
No, I did a lot of Motor Pool Monday where we worked on Humvees. So they spent, I don't know how many dozens of thousands of dollars on training me with language capacity and lots of other stuff too. And then I'd be under a Humvee.
But ironically,
Change
your
of oil.
language was
Russian.
what you used more
It
in
was.
retirement.
That's right.
So,
That's
it
right.
turned out well.
It did.
Thank
It
you,
did.
Army, for
Yes.
training this guy.
That's right.
It's been a lot of help to the Ukraine.
That's right.
So usually you go to some remote, not very nice, out of the place for your training. Where'd you go for your language training?
Oh man, it's one of the premier, from what I understand, premier language institutes in the world, in Monterey, California.
Oh yeah, that's a tough place to
Beautiful.
go.
Yeah. I mean, I showed up there and, literally I couldn't believe that I was fortunate enough to have my training there. And you could hear sea lions, "Ur, ur, ur."
I forgot he did that.
Yeah.
I was there for a few weeks when
Yeah.
I worked for the Army.
It's beautiful.
Oh, it is.
How far is that from San Francisco?
If I remember correctly, a couple hours. I think we could get
so-
up there. We drove up there a few times, yeah.
And then around Pebble Beach.
Oh,
they
Pebble
had this-
Beach was amazing.
Yeah, and the 16-mile drive.
17.
17? It was
They
17.
added a mile.
Do you ever take a mile, 2 miles? The accountant.
I mean, that is a beautiful drive. I mean,
It is.
A great place.
It was nice having that in our backyard. Yeah, they had the Pebble Beach golf tournament that they have, and they asked us to caddy. They came onto the base and were like, "We need some caddies."
Oh wow!
So you got to caddy, and I saw Bill Murray was there. There's a mayor. What's his name?
Clint Eastwood.
Clint Eastwood.
Oh wow!
He was the mayor. He was there. He golfs there a lot. A few other people, but yeah, we had some pretty neat experiences being stationed there.
Well, we're going to have to hold that thought on weird and interesting experiences, and we'll get right back to it after we come back from this break. Hi, I'm Peter from Pikes Peak Recovery Coaching, and as you know, I do help people with drug and alcohol recovery issues. I love to help people get better, but I also offer a variety of other services, including regular life coaching services. I've helped several people write and finish a book. I've helped a doctor that was in medical school graduate and then get into a residency. And I also actually have quite a background in mathematics, and I do some math tutoring for the GED as well as the ASVAB for those that are thinking about a career in the military. So my contact information is on the screen. Please send me an email or a text, and we can talk about some of these services and how I can help. That's Peter Grigg at Pikes Peak Recovery Coaching.
Welcome back. Well, my director tells me I only have 5 minutes, but you have a good story to tell us. You didn't start as a Russian linguist. You started as a
Korean linguist.
Okay. Can you tell us the story about that?
Oh yeah, it's a good one. So
I love this story.
I was in training, and I knew I had signed up for a language position. That's all I knew. The way they had it on my orders, it was XL, which I don't know what that indicated, but it didn't. That was not a language. Everybody had that. And then when you got done with basic, they give you 2 letters that apparently indicated the language you would be going into. And you qualify for different levels. There's like 5 different levels I think they used. Apparently English is the highest, the most complicated by the science of it. And then I think you've got Chinese down from there. And I was in the next category. I can't remember if they called it category 3 or 4, whatever it was. My orders said KP. And anybody that knows anything about the military,
Yeah, that's not the job you want.
people had KP and we're like, did we do something wrong? Are we getting punished with kitchen patrol, I think, or
Yeah.
kitchen duty, right? Yeah. And so I don't remember knowing until I actually got to Monterey. Like they shipped us out and we still didn't know exactly what that meant, if I remember correctly. So I get to Monterey and they assign you by company to whatever language. And there was a whole bunch of us with Korean. And I started in Korean. I had about 2 or 3 months of doing nothing. I just kind of I was a driver. I worked in the orderly room, administrative duties, waiting for my class to start. They had to wait for enough people to come there and come from all different places. So anyhow, I showed up and then I started, I don't remember how many months I had, but I started in the program. And this was in the 90s, the mid 90s. And so before 9/11. And at the time, it was, if you're in a Korean linguist, you're going to go to Fort, the one in Seattle in Washington.
Fort Lewis.
Fort Lewis. It was on the tip of my brain. Thank you. Fort Lewis for a year, and then a year to Korea unaccompanied without your family. I had a wife and 2 kids at the time, or 1 kid, one on the one coming. And I thought, oh, that's going to suck. That's not good for family life. And again, there weren't regular deployments at that time. But I had reserved in my mind to resume my Taekwondo training. I thought, excuse me, I'll get really good at the language. But I was trying to, make the best of it. But I really didn't want to learn Korean, even though I qualified for it. And so I would have chosen, if I could have chosen, we didn't get the choice, but I would have chosen Russian. I grew up in a city in Minneapolis, a suburb of Minneapolis that was largely Jewish, and a lot of Russian Jews migrated there.
Oh, okay.
So I had several friends who were Russian. I dated a ballerina, a Ukrainian ballerina, actually, when I was in high school. And, so I was always interested in that culture. And also growing up during the Cold War, it was just like, I want to learn Russian. So anyhow, I'm in Korean, wanted Russian, and it was actually in the dining facility. I was trying to remember, I hadn't thought of where it was, but it was in the dining facility. I had been lamenting to my friends about Korean, and they were like, oh yeah, Josh is always talking about not wanting to be here. And some guy at the next table over heard us talking and said, you know what? This is what he said. This is kind of crude, but he said, well, yeah, I want to marry a Korean lady.
Oh, wow.
So I'd like to learn Korean. And I was like, okay. And I didn't really listen. But then he said, well, I'm a Russian linguist. And he's like, I want to learn Korean too. I want to get over there. I love Asian women. And I was like, okay. And I was like, huh. So he said, I'm going to talk to my first sergeant and see if we could switch. He posited the idea. And in the military, that's kind of unheard of. That kind of stuff doesn't just happen. You don't get choices like that. You eat it now, taste it later, all those kind of things. Yeah. And but lo and behold, I was able to get and switch into a language after, I think I learned Hangul, the alphabet, the Korean alphabet.
I wonder if that guy ever found his Korean woman.
Yeah.
Training.
Hey, some of that Korean food's great, though.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, yeah,
there's some
it
really
is.
good food. Yeah, some of it's so-so in my opinion, but some really good food too. Good food. So anyhow, after a few months of training, I switched over to become a Russian linguist and I actually moved to the really nice part of the base. Like I moved up the hill too, not just a better language that I would have chosen. And I didn't even know how prophetic that was, that would later become such a big part of the work I was doing to do. And believe it or not, what I've done in Ukraine, military family retreats, which is Parks and Rec background. So my Parks and Rec, my language, and my mental health all come together.
Oh, wow.
Where else in the world would that kind of thing happen? Military family retreats in Ukraine where
That's
communicate with
amazing.
them in Russian.
Yeah, just kind of like a God thing to flow it together.
Background.
Oh.
Well, I guess
Anyhow,
the only other place
Life
that
fit
where that happens
perfectly.
is on
Yeah.
this show.
Yeah, that's right.
Where you
That's
get
right.
to tell your story.
That's
And
We're
right.
going to
and
find
be
out
thankful
more
for it.
next week.
Yeah, when we will continue with part 2 with Dr. Josh Kreimeyer and more exciting stories from the field, including the time where he single-handedly engaged several Russian Special Forces troops.
This is true.
Make sure to tune in next week for that story. And we'll see you next week.
This has been The Third Chair. Next week, we will continue our conversation with Josh Kreimeyer. Want to be a guest? Want to sponsor our show? Send us an email. Please subscribe to our channel and follow us on social media.